She's all better from Melbourne Cup Day. I better not say too much about it, I suppose. Morning, Madonna.
Good morning, Paul J. How are you?
I'm well.
Excellent. This morning I've got a really special guest, my good friend Linda Hoggard. Linda has been a naturopath kinesiologist, the same as me, for about 20 years, and she's here to chat today about stem cell nutrition and anything else that takes our fancy, since we talk about lots of stuff all the time. So, welcome.
Yeah, thanks, Madonna.
Yeah. So, you're in Australia again at the moment to chat about stem cell nutrition. This is something you've been working with for over 10 years now.
Yep, that's correct.
And, of course, you know Christian Drapeau, who was the guy who actually did the original research on the stem cell nutrition. Do you want to have a chat about that, about how whatever interests you along those lines? Yeah,
I guess it's a big subject, and it did start a lot earlier than 10 years ago with Christian looking at a particular algae from Lake Klamath and working with that algae, understanding that it had many benefits, that it was anti-inflammatory and mood enhancing and nutritious, etc. But he was very much taken by the fact that people were having some significant healing effects from the algae. And he actually published a hypothesis that said there must be something in the Lake Klamath blue-green algae that has an effect on a systemic healing mechanism that we don't yet understand. And then in time, particularly around 2003, is a really crucial turning point in the understanding of stem cells, because a couple of guys who won the Nobel Prize in biochemistry that year worked out how to tag stem cells with a glowing green fluorescent DNA that came from a glowing green jellyfish.
Right.
Yeah, and
That's cool.
It is cool. And what they were able to do was start, in animal models, tagging their stem cells with this glowing DNA, and then inducing damage in areas of the body like muscle damage and heart damage. And then what they would see maybe 5 weeks later is that when they biopsy those areas, that the heart would all show up as heart cells, or the muscles would show up as muscle cells.
So you're saying the stem cells become other cells in the body?
Yeah,
right.
But then when they put the light-sensitive frequencies over the top of it, all those cells would be glowing green, so that they could then deduce the fact that these stem cells, these cells that had turned into heart cells, had once been stem cells. And that was a real turning point. And Christian then took some human beings and lots of the algae into university and looked at baseline stem cell migration.
So they didn't know that before 2003?
The understanding of how...
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
That was the real turning point, the biochemists working out the tagging. Because
Right.
before then, I guess from a science point of view, if they wondered how the body healed, that they would look at maybe a healing situation on a microscope, through microscopes, and it would be a very linear observation, and so you couldn't see the transition of cells. So once the cells were tagged with the green fluorescent protein, then you could see the transition, because you knew the cell was once a stem cell because it was tagged, and then it would then biopsy as a different type of cell type. And that was really a major turning point in the understanding.
So they've seen this in liver and heart.
Oh, and now I know when I first started working with Christian stem cell nutrition products, the science was saying, your stem cells could become new liver cells, heart cells, pancreatic cells, brain cells, muscle cells.
Right.
And if you've been watching some of the amazing documentaries that have been on ABC and SBS in Australia, a lot of people now understand the fact that your adult stem cells can become any type of cell in the body, providing they can get to it.
So, right. So some of the research with heart tissue as well, it's about scarred heart being able to regenerate itself as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and certainly death of heart cells post...
heart attacks?
Post heart attack. So there's research papers that would show the biggest indicator as to how well someone would survive a heart attack, providing the heart attack hadn't killed them instantly, which is unfortunately what happens to half the people whose first sign of heart disease is a fatal heart attack. So for those people who are going to survive a heart attack, how well they survive that heart attack and how well their heart bounces back is definitely correlated to their level of migrating adult stem cells in their blood.
So he started working with this algae, and worked out that increased the number of stem cells in the bloodstream.
Yes, so that's what they started to see when they took humans and looked at their baseline adult stem cell levels in their blood, and then gave them quite a substantial amount of their algae. Then they could see that increased.
Okay.
Yeah, and the product development came from obviously those observations, and what they discovered was that there was a long chain sugar in the algae that they've since called L-selectin ligand, because ligand meaning adhered to.
Right.
The long-chain sugar adheres to a compound called L-selectin in the bone marrow, which is like an anchoring compound that anchors the stem cells in our bone marrow.
Right.
Yeah.
So I suppose there's the question then, because everyone heals every day,
Yes.
all the time, so what stops the body from releasing stem cells from the bone marrow to heal us?
Yeah, so there's a lot that science knows now about adult stem cells. We know that our adult stem cells in our bone marrow keep duplicating and remaking themselves. They know that our cells in our body, when the cell lines need renewing and when the cell lines or the cells need repairing, because maybe there's been a damage, whether it be like from a virus, repetitive strain, an accident, etc., those cells release compounds that are calling the stem cells to come into the area to turn into new types of those cells,
right,
like we were talking about post a heart attack. And then I guess the limiting factor is that that works really well until we're roughly around the age 25. And there's varying statistics.
Oh, when you're a young bunny.
Yeah. And so essentially what science is saying generally is that most people over the age of 25, this natural stem cell migration slows down by 5% per year.
Right.
So it's pretty bad. Like, you know, by the time someone's 65, they've reasonably lost 90% of their stem cell migration.
Right.
So I think from a naturopathic point of view, you really start to get an understanding of what's happening in the body that you observe in your clients as they get older. They just don't bounce back. And I guess for all of us as we get older, we experience that. We just, you know, you fall off a bike in your 20s or in your teens, you bounce back. Maybe just not quite as much in your 20s, definitely not in your 30s, and it gets worse. You know, imagine falling off your bike in your 60s and trying to recover from that. That can be a real turning point.
Yes.
Yeah, so essentially the L-selectin that I was talking about that anchors the stem cells in the bone marrow gets stickier the older we get.
So it's inflammation that makes it stickier, or don't we know yet?
I've not read anything on that. It's just that they know that this process gets stickier.
So once it's released out into the bloodstream, how does it get to where it needs to go?
Cool. Not many people remember to ask me that. So, yeah, it's one thing getting your stem cells out into your bloodstream, but your stem cells don't just suddenly move out of your big blood vessels. And as you know, we've got, you know, big arterial blood vessels coming out from our heart, and then of course it goes right down to our microcirculation, and our microcirculation is extremely important to be functioning properly. I know for yourself in your naturopathic clinic, like in mine, we're looking at people's blood and we're often looking for this compound called fibrin, which is that cobwebbing effect that it's often the size of about 20 red blood cells, and we know that the smallest of our microcirculation is only 1 red blood cell thick, so that and that any cell in the body is only 2 cells away from the microcirculation. And so this is the area where the red blood
Which is
cells,
amazing when you think about how tiny we're talking there.
Yeah, but it is, because I guess we walk around with these amazing bodies and they're made of 50 trillion cells. And we're talking about a healing and repair mechanism that happens at a cellular level. So you've got to really bore down your perspective to our bodies at an individual cellular level, where individual red blood cells come through and release oxygen, nutrition, take away carbon dioxide.
So that sticky stuff, the spiderweb-like stuff, it stops the stem cells from getting into the cells where they need to go.
There's only one point where the stem cells migrate in from the blood vessels to the cellular level, and that's that junction between the capillaries and the venules, which of course is only 1 red blood cell thick. So if you've got fibrin the size of 10, 20, 30 or bigger, as a cobwebbing effect upstream, that's going to affect...
It's a fairly big cork, going to stop it getting in there.
It's a big cork, and of course it's affecting oxygenation and everything.
Yeah,
and I think, you know, a lot of people would often say, oh, you know, you look really healthy, you've got great glowing skin. And I go, you know, that's because my microcirculation is open. And people focus on that. And I go, you know, you should really be worried about the microcirculation in your brain and to the back of your eyes and down to your feet and throughout your body.
And I suppose that's the question, that because people probably don't care about their microcirculation. What they care about is the symptoms that they get that would make them think about their microcirculation. So are we talking like stuff like pins and needles in the extremities?
Well, particularly cold hands and feet, and cold noses, cold ears. Certainly as people get older, they experience like a brain fog from just poor circulation up into their brain.
So all of that could, of course, be considered thyroid disorder as well. So if someone sort of was to look up all the thyroid symptoms, those would be there.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's a whole lot, when our body really goes from health into dysfunction and into disease, there's a lot of things that occur, hence why, we see under, I'm talking in Australia now, aren't we? There's some things,
Yes.
that we certainly still do in New Zealand, like look at people's blood under microscopes, that there's a whole lot of dysfunction that starts to
Yes.
happen, and I guess the weak point in a person will then fall over, whether
Yes.
that, maybe their
Is their
pancreas
thyroid or their
gut
liver or
their thyroid, but ultimately once someone's got to that state, you're going to be seeing levels of systemic inflammation.
Yes.
Yeah, which I guess is what it all boils down to.
Yeah. And I talk a lot about this, about the fact that people often don't know they're inflamed. So inflammation is one of those weird things where people expect redness, they expect swelling, they expect soreness, but every cell in our body can be inflamed
Exactly.
without us having
Yeah.
a lot of symptoms.
Yeah, and where we experience inflammation as pain is where we have pain receptors, but we don't have pain receptors in our arteries and in our liver and those sorts of places.
Yeah.
And going into the kidney tubules, when you look at a lot of aging processes, a big issue is inflammation on the blood vessels going into the heart and into the kidneys, and then how inflammation and stress hormones, blood sugar fluctuations, how that damages the inside of our blood vessel walls, and then cholesterol doing its job comes along to cover it, and then of course those areas build up with calcium.
See, I'm not the only one who says that, Paul J. Cholesterol doing its job.
Yeah,
It's a healing nutrient.
Then you start looking at all these massive rampant inflammatory processes that start to occur, calling the immune system and really the chemistry of what happens in that plaquing.
Yeah.
And it's significant, and also around the kidneys as well.
So with the, if you were to think of big stuff you're seeing that the stem cell nutrition is helping it, because you travel widely
Yes.
talking to people about this, what are the exciting things that you're starting to see?
I think, oh God, there's a lot. So I think, just to recap, that what we know is that our stem cells are always migrating, and they're part of how our body turns itself over and repairs itself. This process slows down as we get older, so hence, in your 40s, you might be only looking at 50% reduction in your stem cell migration. And then I'm talking about using a natural product that's had double-blind research that shows that when you take 2 capsules, you have at least a 34% increase in your stem cell migration.
Right.
So depending on the person, that's going to be an extra 4 to 9 million stem cells being released from their bone marrow into their blood. So I guess from a supplement point of view, I can talk about that's what the supplements I work with do.
Yes.
And then the next thing is then what can your stem cells do once they're released? And really the answer is kind of what can't they do?
Yeah.
Your stem cells, because they can become any type of cell in the body, they just get used up everywhere. And as people get older and more degenerative, they get a lot more pain and inflammation, and ultimately the body's screaming out for more healing.
Yes.
And that's what really makes sense to me from a naturopathic point of view, that build-up of inflammation and systemic inflammation gets worse as we get older, because also we're not renewing and repairing at that rate. So there's this constant calling of come and heal me, that is the inflammatory signals, and it's just like a big slippery slide.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, we might take a quick break there, Paul J, and we'll come back after a song.
Yes, I've got to take all that in. And then, Linda, you're just talking about getting old and everything I'm in for. So
Yeah,
Well, you haven't already started?
Well, he's just hit that 25-year-old hill. Yeah.
Yeah, 28 actually. We'll be back with more of AFM and the Health Hour.